Watch this when everything is going wrong. Neville Goddard. Neville Goddard taught that the outer world is only the mirror of the inner one, and when it feels like everything in your life is unraveling at once, it is not punishment. It is the mirror finally showing you the state you have been quietly assuming without ever noticing you assumed it. There is a scene in the Gospel of Matthew, the 14th chapter, that Neville Goddard read not as a fisherman's tale on a sea 2,000 years gone, but as a picture of your own mind in this very hour. Peter steps out of the boat and walks on the water toward the very thing he desires. And the words are these: "But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, 'Lord, save me.'" And Neville Goddard would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it?" Peter was already walking. He was already doing the impossible thing, until he turned his attention away from the state he was walking in and looked instead at the wind, the circumstance, the evidence of his outer senses. And in that same instant he began to sink. This is you. This is every time the bills or the diagnosis or the silence from someone you love seemed to prove that your desire was foolish, you were walking. And then you looked at the wind, and the good news hidden inside this old story is that the water never changed, only your attention did, which means it can change back. And here is a small assumption to plant right now before we go any further. Say it with me. I am calm within the storm. I am already living in the state of my request fulfilled. Imagination creates my reality. Again, I am calm within the storm. I am already living in the state of my request fulfilled. Imagination creates my reality. If something in you just went quiet reading those words, if that landed somewhere deeper than the thinking mind, type the 2 words "it's done" in the comments below right now, and let it be your seal on everything we are about to build together. The first key is to remember always that you are not the state you are in. You are the awareness moving through it. When the rent is late or the body is aching or the phone refuses to ring, it is so easy to say, "I am broke, I am sick, I am rejected." But Neville Goddard taught that these are only rooms in a vast house of many mansions, and you, the I am, are the one walking the halls. Never a room you happen to be standing in. Picture a man who loses his position on a Monday morning. By Tuesday, he has already decided he is an unemployed man. He wears it like a coat. He introduces himself with it at dinner. He checks his bank balance 3 times a day, just to feel the coat settle more heavily on his shoulders. He has moved into that state and quietly furnished it and called it home. But a state is not a self. It is only a garment consciousness has put on for a season. And what consciousness has put on, consciousness can just as easily lay back down. Notice that the very same man, hours before the news arrived, was not an unemployed man at all. Nothing in him had changed. Only the room he decided to stand in changed. So the moment you catch yourself saying, "I am this hard, unbearable thing," stop right there and ask silently, who is it that is aware I am saying this? That quiet witness behind the words has never once been poor or sick or rejected. It has only ever been aware, watching, waiting for you to remember it. Consider also the small daily version of this same forgetting. A woman spills coffee on her blouse on her way out the door, and by the time she reaches her car, she has already said it. Of course, this is the kind of day I am having. She has moved into the room called a day where nothing goes right, and furnished it before a single other thing has occurred. A red light, a curt reply, each one welcomed in like an old friend confirming what she already decided at 7:15. But Neville Goddard would gently ask her, and gently ask you, who is the one noticing all of this? Because the noticer is never the noise. The noticer was calm before the coffee spilled, and remains calm underneath the whole performance. So today, when the wrong feeling rises in you like a tide, simply step back 1 pace in consciousness and say quietly, "I am the one aware of this state. I am not the state itself." That single step back is a doorway. And once you know you are not sealed inside the room, you are free to ask which room you would rather stand in instead. I am the awareness, not the trouble I am aware of. The second key is revision. And this is the tool Neville Goddard gave for the days when everything already seems to have gone wrong before noon. Revision simply means that at night, before you sleep, you take the events of the day that displeased you and you replay them, not as they happened, but as you wish they had happened. Suppose a colleague spoke to you sharply in front of others, and you carried the sting home in your chest all afternoon. That evening, close your eyes, see the scene again, only now hear the words spoken kindly, feel yourself received with respect, and feel the relief of it as though it is truly happening now. Neville Goddard taught that this is not pretending, it is correcting, because the day you lived through with your senses was only one version of it. The true and final version is the one you settle into within, and imagination, impressed deeply enough, can reach backward and soften what already seemed fixed. This is one of the boldest things he ever taught, that the past is not as solid as it appears, changeable to the one who knows how to use imagination rightly. Think of it this way: the outer world is only a shadow thrown behind you, and no one scrubs a stain out of a shadow on the wall. You go instead to the object casting it, and the object is never the event. It is always the state you have quietly agreed to carry about the event. So revision is not comfort, it is correcting the very substance tomorrow will be built from, because tomorrow is only today's unrevised feeling, wearing a new date. Consider a woman who receives a curt reply to a hopeful email. She feels the small cold drop in her chest and carries it into sleep unrevised. And it becomes the very lens through which she reads tomorrow before it arrives. But if instead, before sleep, she sees the reply again warm and generous, and feels briefly the ease of being well received, she is choosing which version becomes the seed, and only one version can be planted. Consider too a father who speaks impatiently to his son after a hard commute, and feels the sting of having wounded someone he loves. If he lets it lie unrevised, it sits in him like a stone in a shoe. But that night he lives the moment again, kneeling gently, seeing the boy's face soften instead of fall. He is not denying what was said. He is refusing to let it be the final word. And Neville Goddard taught that this quiet nightly correction, done faithfully, shapes the very character a man becomes. This is why the wise were told to let not the sun go down upon their wrath, not as politeness but as a law of consciousness, because whatever state you fall asleep in tonight is the very state waiting at the door tomorrow. So tonight, choose one moment from today that stung, however small, live it again the better way, feel it as true, then release it, and let sleep carry it down into fact. I revise my day, and my day obeys me. The third key is to see, in plain ordinary hours, how much of the wrong day you actually authored yourself, before you ever call it evidence. So let us walk through a single day together, slowly, the way Neville Goddard would have you walk through it. 6 in the morning the alarm sounds, and before the feet even touch the floor, the mind says quietly, "Here we go again, another hard day." Notice that nothing has happened yet. No traffic, no email, no unkind word, only an assumption, spoken in the dark, unnoticed, already at work, already writing the script the day will be asked to perform. 7 in the morning. Standing before the mirror, a tired face looks back, and the thought rises, "I look worn out. Nothing is going my way lately." And that face in the glass simply agrees, because a mirror can only ever agree. 8 o'clock. The coffee is too hot, the traffic is heavier than usual, and the thought rises, "Of course, nothing goes smoothly for me." That is not a fact about the traffic. That is a state being confirmed and strengthened. 10 o'clock. An email arrives with news that is only slightly disappointing, and it is received as proof. See, I knew this would happen. One small ordinary event, dressed up in the mind as evidence for an entire identity. Noon, lunch alone, a message left unanswered on the phone, and the thought whispers, "No one really thinks of me again." Not a fact, a feeling, wearing the costume of a fact so convincingly that it is never once questioned. 3 in the afternoon, a small kindness from a stranger passes almost unnoticed, a held door, a warm word. because the mind is too busy scanning for confirmation of the story it already decided this morning at 6. It cannot see what it was never looking for. 5 in the afternoon. A friend cancels plans for the evening, and instead of simply being a scheduling matter, it becomes, in the tired mind, one more brick laid onto the wall of the story. No one has time for me anymore. Notice how each of these moments, taken alone, is almost nothing. A delay, a silence, a cancellation, but strung together on the thread of one single unquestioned assumption from 6 in the morning. They become, by nightfall, what feels like undeniable proof of a hard, unfair life. 6 in the evening, home again, exhausted, not from the day's events, but from the sheer effort of maintaining a state all day long without rest. Holding a roll together is its own quiet labor, and by 9 at night, the verdict is delivered. Everything is going wrong for me. But now imagine, in that very same city, on that very same Tuesday, another person wakes at 6 and simply assumes, "Today will be gentle with me." The traffic is the same traffic. The email is nearly the same email. The unanswered message is the same silence. The canceled plan is the same empty evening. And yet by 9 that night, this second person tells a wholly different story. Perhaps she uses the quiet evening to rest. Perhaps she notices the held door and lets it warm her for the rest of the afternoon, because the hours themselves were neutral. Only the assumption carried underneath them was not. Neville Goddard would ask you, gently but firmly, what if the day did not go wrong? What if you simply assumed at 6 in the morning that it would, and then spent 16 hours faithfully, unconsciously, gathering evidence for your own private prophecy? It is not that the world conspired against you, it is that consciousness, left undirected, will always find a way to prove whatever it was told to prove. This is the sobering and freeing truth, hidden inside an ordinary Tuesday. Imagination was working every single hour, whether you directed it or not. It never once took a break. It was only ever a question of who was holding the pen. Pause for a moment now and pick one real hour from your own yesterday, one small, unremarkable moment, and ask honestly, was I assuming the wrong thing before the evidence even arrived? Most of the time, quietly, you will find that you were, and once you see it clearly in 1 hour, you begin to see it in all of them. And this is exactly why, inside the 21-day reality shift, we walk through mornings and evenings like this one together, hour by hour, until the pattern becomes impossible to miss. Now let us continue. The fourth key is to understand that everyone is you pushed out. This is one of Neville Goddard's most startling teachings, and one of the most freeing once it is truly received. The difficult person in your life is not an accident wandering in from nowhere. They are a reflection appearing according to your own assumptions about yourself and about others. If you move through your days assuming people are cold, that you are overlooked, that respect must be earned and is rarely given, the world will arrange itself, obligingly, to hand you people who behave exactly that way, not because they are villains, but because consciousness is the single substance out of which every character in your life is fashioned. Consider a man named Daniel, who has quietly assumed for years that his opinions do not matter much in a room. He never says this aloud, but it lives underneath him the way a floor lives underneath a house, and so in meetings he is spoken over again and again, his suggestions repeated moments later by someone else and praised. He calls it just how this office is. But Neville Goddard would ask, whose office is it really? One evening he stops rehearsing the slight and asks quietly, what have I been assuming about myself in that room? And the answer comes, I have assumed I am easy to overlook. So before sleep, he begins to picture himself speaking, and a room growing still to listen. He feels briefly the simple dignity of being heard. He confronts no one. He only revises the self he carries into that room. And within weeks, without a single argument, the room begins to listen differently, because it was never the room that needed to change. This same law holds in gentler corners too. A woman who has quietly assumed for years that she is easy to love finds herself surrounded by people who love her easily, while another, who has never examined her quiet belief that affection must be earned through constant giving, finds herself again and again exhausted, surrounded by those who take without noticing, and calls it bad luck with people, when Neville Goddard would call it simply an unexamined self-concept. Faithfully reflected back, you were never meant to spend your life arguing with a mirror. No amount of scrubbing at the glass ever changed the face looking back at it. You attend instead to the face. So ask honestly, what do I secretly believe about how people treat me? What do I quietly assume I deserve? Then revise that belief the way you would revise a single unpleasant day. See yourself respected before you are respected. Assume yourself valued before the evidence arrives. And watch the very people around you begin to shift. Not because you demanded it of them, but because you are no longer the same one they are reflecting. It is not that Daniel's co-workers changed, it is that Daniel did, and the room, being only a mirror, had no choice left but to follow. I am the one being reflected, not the one being acted upon. The fifth key is the deepest one, and it is simply this: learn to live in the end. First, consider what living in the end actually means. It does not mean hoping for an outcome. It does not mean wishing very hard. It does not mean waiting anxiously by the window to see what the day brings. It means assuming, now, in this present moment, the feeling of the wish already fulfilled. Neville Goddard taught that the moment you truly assume a thing is so, and persist in that assumption undisturbed, it hardens into fact. Most people live in the middle of the story, worrying over the plot, checking anxiously to see how things are unfolding, refreshing the phone, rereading the letter, listening for footsteps that never come. But you are not asked to live in the middle. You are asked to live in the end, the way a person lives who already has the thing, already feels the relief, already wears the piece of it like an old familiar coat that has hung in the closet so long it no longer feels new. Let me give you a small, ordinary picture of this, because it is easier felt through a story than through an idea alone. Imagine a woman named Claire who has been waiting 3 long weeks to hear whether her offer on a small house has been accepted. Every evening the waiting has been eating at her. Every evening she checks her phone one more time before bed, and every evening she falls asleep, still holding the question open in her chest like a held breath. One night, she remembers what she was taught. So instead of falling asleep in the question, she decides to fall asleep in the answer. She does not check the phone. She does not review the estimate. She does not run through the reasons it might fall through. Instead, she lies still, and she imagines the small, ordinary moment that would only be true if the house were already hers. She pictures herself turning a particular key in a particular door. She feels the coolness of that key in her fingers. She hears the small, familiar click of the lock giving way. She does not stage a grand celebration. She does not imagine a party or applause. She simply imagines the small, quiet proof that it is already so, and she lets that single feeling carry her into sleep, the way a boat is carried gently by a current. This, Neville Goddard would say, is living in the end, not staged, not dramatic, simply true, simply felt, simply believed. Second, consider the state akin to sleep. Neville Goddard taught that the imagination works most powerfully in that drowsy threshold just before sleep takes you, when the outer world has grown soft and distant, and the body has gone still, though the mind remains gently, faintly awake. In that in-between place, whatever you dwell upon sinks down past the noisy, arguing surface mind, and settles into the deeper region where assumptions become law. This is why Claire did not choose to imagine her scene at noon in the middle of a busy afternoon. She chose the edge of sleep, because the edge of sleep is the door left slightly ajar, and imagination slips through a door left ajar far more easily than one held shut and guarded all day by doubt. So before sleep tonight, do not review your worries. Do not rehearse the wrong day. Instead, imagine one small intimate scene, not the whole grand outcome, just one ordinary moment that could only be happening if the wish were already true. Someone congratulating you quietly, a voice on the phone confirming the news, your own hand resting on something you now finally possess. Feel it, briefly, warmly, as though it is simply true, and let it carry you down into sleep, the way Claire let the small click of that lock carry her. And notice also that this state, akin to sleep, is available to you not only at night, but in any quiet, unguarded minute. On a bus, in a waiting room, in the few slow minutes before an alarm forces you upright, any moment the body relaxes and the senses grow quiet is a small doorway, and you may use even 5 such minutes, faithfully, to plant the same scene again and again. Third, consider persistence, because this is precisely where most people, quietly, without ever noticing, let go of the very thing they were praying for. They assume the end for one evening, they feel wonderful for one evening, and then morning comes and the old worried question creeps back in before the coffee is even poured. Neville Goddard taught that the fashioning power of imagination requires persistence in the assumption, the way a seed requires more than a single afternoon of sun. You would never plant a seed on Monday and dig it back up on Tuesday morning, simply to check whether it had grown roots yet. And yet this is exactly what most people do with their own assumptions. Claire almost did this too. On the 4th morning after she began her small ritual, she woke, and her hand reached instinctively for the phone, before her eyes were even fully open. And she caught herself, and she paused, and instead of checking, she returned for a few quiet seconds to the feeling of the key turning in the lock. She let that be the first thought of her day instead of the old anxious question. This is the discipline hidden inside the peace. When you wake, before your feet touch the floor, return for a few seconds to the feeling you fell asleep in. Let the first thought of the day be the end already fulfilled, not the problem already resuming its old familiar noise. Do this quietly, without straining, without checking on it every hour like a nervous gardener pulling up the roots again and again just to see if they have grown. And if you slip, if you catch yourself 3 days from now anxiously refreshing an email or replaying an old fear, do not scold yourself for it. Simply notice, gently, and return again. The returning itself is the whole practice. There is no version of this discipline that requires perfection, only faithfulness that begins again each time it wanders. And fourth, consider this. When everything around you seems to be going wrong at once, this inward act is the one thing that never depends on outer permission. You cannot always calm the wind. You cannot always silence the phone call you dread or soften the news before it arrives. But you can, at any hour, lie down inwardly, in the end already fulfilled. You can hold Claire's small quiet key, turning in her small quiet lock, or whatever scene is true for your own longing, and let that state, faithfully assumed, faithfully returned to, do what states have always done since the very beginning of the world, become facts. This is not passive dreaming. It is the most active thing a person can do, because it is the choosing of which state you will feed with your attention today. I live in the end, and the end lives quietly in me. The 6th key is simply this. Do not abandon the assumption the moment the wind picks up again. Neville Goddard taught that persistence is the very substance of faith, not a grim, gritted teeth kind of holding on, but a quiet, steady refusal to be shaken loose from the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And here is why this key matters more than almost any other. Because it is not the beginning of an assumption that proves you. Anyone can feel wonderful for one evening. Anyone can lie down in the end fulfilled after a good day and call it faith. The real test comes on the ordinary Tuesday 3 days later, when nothing outward has changed yet. Consider a man who wants a certain position at work. He assumes it, he feels it, he goes to sleep one night, truly living as the one already promoted, and for a day or two he walks lighter. Then Friday comes and the announcement he expected does not arrive, and by Saturday morning he is checking his email every 20 minutes, refreshing it the way a nervous gardener digs up a seed to see if it has taken root. This checking, this small anxious refreshing, is the exact moment Neville Goddard would call the wind rising. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. It hides inside something as small as a phone screen, and it is enough to sink a man who was walking beautifully only days before. So persistence does not mean waiting bravely for one grand test. It means this, the small daily returning, morning and evening, sometimes hour by hour if the old evidence is loud, gently bringing the attention back to the feeling of the thing already true, without straining, without demanding proof, without keeping score, There will be a morning this week when the old evidence returns. A bill, a delay, a silence where you wanted a reply, and in that moment you will be tempted, as Peter was, to look at the wind. When that happens, simply remember, I am not required to explain how, I am only required to remain. Return to the feeling, return to the end. Return again if you must return 100 times before breakfast. This is not weakness. This is the very discipline that turns an assumption into a fact of experience. The storm does not need your permission to pass. It only needs you to stop feeding it your attention. I remain in the assumption, and the assumption remains faithful to me. Here is the whole picture. You are not the state you are in. You are the awareness, wearing it for a season. The day is not against you. It is only revised when you decide it should be. The people around you are not separate from you. They are you pushed out and mirrored back. And the end you long for is not somewhere ahead of you waiting to be earned. It is a state you may enter tonight in feeling and awaken inside tomorrow. 6 turns of one single key. And that key was never the circumstance. It was always attention, held steady, returned to gently, again and again, until the wind grows quiet on its own. If you are ready to stop meeting each new wrong morning alone, and want to build this practice daily, with guided assumptions for waking, for sleeping, and for revising each day before it hardens into fact, the 21-day reality shift was built exactly for that. 21 days of walking hand in hand through this discipline of living in the end. It is a small investment, $37, fully backed by a guarantee, and if it does not serve you, simply ask and it is returned. You will find the link in the description below. I am already living in the storm. I am already living in the state of my request fulfilled. Imagination creates my reality. And whatever seems to be going wrong tonight, watch it quietly, without fear, because you were never asked to fix the storm, only to remember, gently, faithfully, who has been walking on the water all along.